Switch 2 speculation season is in full swing, so I thought, why not join the fun and zoom in on the prospects of Amiibo on the new console. After all, there's been a lot of talk about the Switch 2 simply being a better Switch, which would then also include Amiibo support. But you don't have to be a market analyst to recognize Amiibo are past the peak of their popularity. So that begs the question, what role do Amiibo have left to play on Nintendo's new console? Before we can say anything sensible about Amiibo's prospects, however, we first need to look at how they exactly work. After all, how difficult and expensive the tech is to implement, as well as how alluring to customers, will be factors Nintendo will carefully consider. Now, apologies to anyone who feels absolutely ancient after hearing this, but Amiibo recently celebrated their 10th birthday. They originated on the 3DS and have since also been compatible with the Wii U and Switch, meaning a potential Switch 2 would be the 4th device to use them. Amiibo use near-field communication, NFC, to connect to the system, and upon scanning them, most games will give you in-game rewards for your efforts. Back in the early days, this tended to be pretty significant stuff. Smash 4, the title Amiibo were first revealed with, has an entire mode built around it, and titles like Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival and Mario Party 10 heavily rely on them as well. Others go for nothing game-changing, but still worth it, like Breath of the Wild and Wolf Link, and Metroid Samus Returns, which unlocks several gameplay elements behind possession of a relevant Amiibo. Whether this is a good or a bad thing is an age-old question. The Nintendo version of chicken and egg, really. After all, no one likes content gated behind expensive extras. But then again, if these toys add nothing, what's the point of scanning them? I mean, I own only 2 Amiibos, but both of them I've never scanned, simply because the rewards in the games weren't worth it. That has mostly been the fate of Amiibo on the Switch, especially in the latter half of its lifespan. Scanning relevant Amiibo still give you rewards, but it's mostly items, gear or other minor stuff that you can also just get for playing the game itself. And not only has the in-game implementation been downsized as the Switch heads into its final year, the amount of games that came accompanied with a new Amiibo has also sharply decreased. Since the start of 2023, only 2 new games have had new Amiibo to go along with it, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Xenoblade 3. But even in the years prior, the decline was visible. 2022 also had only 2. 2021 had 3, 2020 had 0, not counting New Horizons cards, and 2019 had 1. We have to go all the way back to 2018 for more, which had a grand total of 6, as much as the 4 years that followed combined. Conclusion, Nintendo's confidence in Amiibo is dwindling, and has dwindled. And while we don't have the sales numbers for Amiibo past 2022, I'm willing to bet they aren't great. Over time, Amiibo became less toy to life, which was a huge trend in 2014, and more simple collector's item. That may be an evergreen novelty, but consumer interest for them is much lower than for one of the industry's hottest trends. That said, for the question at hand, being evergreen is a good thing, right? After all, if Amiibo managed to bring in more than they cost to produce, what's the harm in keeping them? That is, however, an if we don't know the answer to, since we have no clue how expensive an Amiibo is to produce. But I'm willing to bet my entire Amiibo collection that the cost of making this piece of plastic is nowhere near the $15 you're paying for them. Meaning Nintendo is making some very healthy profit margins on these babies. Okay, so the plastic won't be the problem, what about the technology? They all need NFC chips implanted in their base after all. Well, I won't pretend to be an expert on this field, but considering Nintendo can stuff these chips into literal trading cards worth a few coins at most, I don't think that would be a problem either. An even larger mystery is the cost of implementing the NFC reading ability into the console, both from a how much would it raise the price perspective, as well as a how much power would it cost perspective. But considering the 3DS could handle it perfectly fine, and Nintendo still made profit on it after a hefty price cut, I doubt the NFC technology will weigh heavily on either the price or the performance of the Switch 2. Especially if the system is basically just a souped up Switch and not a complete overhaul once again, porting that functionality over shouldn't be too difficult, I would think. So far so good, right? Well, chances for Amiibo being a serious burden for the Switch 2 are definitely low, but that doesn't just make it a given they'll return. There's another important factor that I think Nintendo will probably consider even more important. Do the toys still attract, interest and excite customers? It's a question without a clear and definitive answer, but let's walk through some potential ones. One thing is for certain, the masses have abandoned Amiibo. If they hadn't, more games would be released alongside new ones. Simple as that. But that doesn't mean interest has entirely waned. Instead, the audience seems to have changed from basically everyone to collectors and superfans. It's no coincidence the only new Amiibo we've had the last few years are all in series with very dedicated fanbases or third-party characters, where getting an Amiibo is much more of an event than another Mario one. So in that light, there is also no reason for Amiibo to be abandoned. Just lower the printing numbers to accommodate for lower interest and you're good to go, right? Well, here we find the first big problem for Amiibo, one I already briefly mentioned before. You don't need to make them toys to life in order for collectors to be interested. A huge percent of current Amiibo buyers aren't interested in the in-game effects anymore. They just want Noah or Mio on their stand or their collection complete. So what's stopping Nintendo from just releasing Amiibo-like figurines as collector's edition bonuses or standalone items? Nothing, really. And that is a serious threat to Amiibo's existence. This can basically be summarized as a difference between consumer interest and consumer excitement. Interest is still there. It has decreased, sure, but it still exists. But excitement? That has definitely gone entirely. Whenever new Amiibo are announced, no one is excited about the in-game effects anymore, merely the figurine. The bonuses have gone stale, the novelty is worn off. And knowing Nintendo, they'll look at those facts with a keen eye going into the Switch 2. After all, I think the last thing they will want is to include features that will more or less feel stale right out of the box, and Amiibo implementation is a perfect example of that. You also shouldn't forget that while a good portion of us were around to see Amiibo's debut, the Switch 2 will of course be the first console for an entirely new generation of gamers. Imagine you being a kid. You were hyped as hell of course, and maybe reading about what the Switch 2 is capable of online. And then you see you can use it to scan more than 800 statues, some of them almost as old as you are. That's not something that entices you into buying one or becoming a collector. Not at all. But a new statue for your favorite upcoming game, no strings attached? That's much easier to get into. Amiibo may not be a hindrance to the price point or literal performance of the Switch 2, but I would not be surprised if Nintendo at this point considers the Amiibo brand a bit of a negative factor. Too bloated, not exciting, and a nightmare to manage in terms of stock. Altogether, a gimmick that has no potential left to go anywhere new with its peak behind it. And when you put it like that, the situation suddenly looks a lot more grim for Amiibo's future. That said, I personally do think the Switch 2 will still support Amiibo, but it will be made clear early on in the console's life that no new Amiibo with NFC capabilities will be made. This has been the writing on the wall recently, I think, considering games like Mario Bros. Wonder or Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door would have made for prime Amiibo material a few years back. But the technology is very easy to implement, and assuming the Switch 2 is backwards compatible as you'd expect, keeping the functionality of old Amiibo in those games may even be easier than removing it in all those older titles. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo ends up with a sum where supporting old Amiibo for one more generation is actually an easier solution than removing it cold turkey. But that doesn't mean Amiibo aren't on their way out. Maybe the name will be retained for future figurines without NFC capabilities, as I doubt Nintendo will cease producing collector's items altogether, but the toys to life aspect of them is, I would say, guaranteed to end sooner rather than later. In fact, there is one final hint that I haven't mentioned yet, pointing towards this being what Nintendo is planning. The Power-Up Band. These are Mario-themed bracelets that can be bought at Super Nintendo World in Universal Studios Hollywood. But when you take them home to your Switch after a fun weekend, they function as Amiibo of the characters they resemble. So if Amiibo support was removed on the Switch 2 full stop, the bands would lose their purpose outside of the park within the next year, presumably. That to me sounds incredibly unlikely, and I would presume Nintendo would future-proof them better than that. So yeah, I suspect existing Amiibo will continue to be supported, but we won't see any or very few new ones. But hey, what do I know? Let me know in the comments how you see the future of Amiibo, and how you would like to see them implemented in the Switch 2 if Nintendo were to put you in charge. If you enjoyed my take on the topic, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Nintendo content. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.